How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in one convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
Finished training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Hello, and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and for Halloween, we're rechristening October as Mary Shelley Month. All this month, we're going to be talking about the iconic horror author who wrote Frankenstein when she was just a teenager. Her life was full of a lot of goth stuff, actually. And today we're starting off the whole saga with a discussion of her mother, who is a woman named Mary Wollstonecraft. And honestly, I knew her name. I kind of vaguely knew what her whole deal was, but when I started reading about it, I was just like, this is a vulgar history type story. It's not just like, oh, this is the mother of Mary Shelley. It's like, oh no, this is a woman who earned her way on this podcast through her own just tits out lifestyle. If you don't know, on this podcast, that's what we call people who just live a really audacious lifestyle where they're just not doing what everyone else is doing and they're challenging the status quo constantly. And that's what she was up to. My main source for this episode is a book called Romantic Outlaws, The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley by Charlotte Gordon, which is a biography like every other chapter. There's like one about Mary Wollstonecraft and the next chapter is about Mary Shelley. And I appreciate that she did it that way because the two women are often discussed like it's bananas that this is a mother and daughter, considering how significant they both are to just like literature. But there's so many books that are about Mary Shelley. There's so many books about Mary Wollstonecraft, but her books combines them both. And then I extricated just the Mary Shelley part to bring you this episode today. So yeah, all month we're going to be talking about Mary Shelley, her friends and her family, and we have to start with her mother. And you know what? For Halloween month, like this is a pretty grim, dark story. I think the vibes are right to just like have your pumpkin spice latte, have your cat next to you. I have my cat next to me. And maybe you can hear her purring. Her name is Hepburn. Let's get into it. So Mary Wollstonecraft, first of all, astonishingly great name. Wollstonecraft, excellent surname. So she's born April 27th, 1759. So this is all a bit earlier than, welcome if this is your first episode, but the last season of Vulgar History, we were looking at the French Revolution era. So this is like 30 or so years before that all happened. So, and we're in England, we're not in France. Like we're doing a whole different topic, whole different subject matter. We're talking about England, 1759. So Mary Wollstonecraft was born. She was the second child in what would be a family that would eventually have 7 children. She had one older brother, Ned, who sucked, but we'll get to that. And a whole bunch of younger siblings eventually. So her family was in England at that time, and also in this time, really, there's a really strict sort of what is your class, a class structure, you might call it. So her family was modestly prosperous. So her father's father owned a successful silk weaving business. Her mother's father was a wine merchant in Ireland. So it's kind of a family of shopkeepers, sorts of things. I want to mention also, so her father's called Edward. Her mother's called Elizabeth. Her father sucked. Her father was what we could generously call hot-tempered. He had a ferocious temper. He was abusive to his wife. He was abusive to his children. He was just a shitty person overall. He was also bad at every job he ever tried to do. He had a real chip on his shoulder. That's his personality, Edward. The mother, Elizabeth, she, in accordance with what was expected of women and mothers and wives in this era, she kind of was quiet and subservient and like passive. And that was the vibes of the parents. So Mary, like very quickly, she came to realize. And we know a lot about what we know about her because she wrote so much like memoirs of her life. So this is like first person, her experience of her life. She hated her father, understandably, because he constantly abused her and her siblings and her mother in front of her. As it turns out, like between if these are your parents, like maybe you're going to turn out to be like your mom and maybe you're going to turn out to be like your dad. And she's like her dad, comma, only in the sense that she had a real temper to her. She really felt like she deserved better in life. Her father, when I mentioned the chip on the shoulder, he really felt like he was really part of what drove his abuse and his anger and his alcoholism was just seeing how fucked up all of society was and how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and there's no upward mobility for people like him. And doesn't that suck? And so she also, just from hearing him talk about it, but also just growing up where she grew up, and I'll talk about what that was like in a second, she just really had this sense of like, this sucks and I'm mad about it. Relatable, frankly. So she also fought a lot with her brother, Ned, who, again, was horrific and a terrible person. And so when her brother, he was like 2 years older than her, when he tried to bully her, she would like fight back at him. When her mother tried to impose rules, she would rebel against those rules. And she began what Charlotte Gordon describes in her biography as a lifelong insurgency against her father. So like he would try to get her to behave the way that he thought a daughter should behave. And she used the same tools against him, rage, stubbornness, and just a deeply rooted sense of feeling like you deserve something better out of the shitty life that you were born into. So initially, this family moves a lot. I'm going to say a lot of street names, a lot of town names. If you're familiar with olden times London, or frankly, present times London or England, maybe you'll be like, hey, that's where my grandpa was. I don't know. I'm going to say a bunch of streets. I'm in Canada. None of these names mean anything to me, and I'm going to pronounce them as best I can. So from ages 0 till 4, she and her family lived in a place called Primrose Street, which is no longer exists, but it's near modern day Liverpool Street Station. So there's no more Primrose Street, but during Mary's lifetime, it was twisted through the center of the ancient market town of Spitalfields, which is now part of London, I believe. Anyway, so huddled to the east of the city walls on the site of an ancient Roman cemetery, this village was polluted by this stench. It's just like how, like, not dystopian, but, just like grim, sort of like, this is 100 years before Charles Dickens, but just like Dickensian, the vibes of just like shitty slum London. There were enormous vats of urine throughout this town that were used in nearby tanning factories. I guess I don't know about this. Maybe you do use urine to dye leather. So smelled like urine because there's like massive amounts of vats of urine. And this area was also one of the most violent, class-driven neighborhoods in 18th century London. So it smells like urine and you're going to get beat up walking down the street. It was crowded, it was noisy, it was filthy. And this kind of leads to people like her dad, Edward, who had sort of aspirations to be like a gentleman. Like it just made him mad to be living there. He'd grown up there and he always wanted to leave. And so like Mary Shelley left there when she was 4, so she probably didn't remember it super well. But it was such a part of her father's personality. And a lot of the things he complained about came from what he saw there. Again, he's a shitty, terrible person. And he kind of had a point about like the lack of upward mobility for people, like how horrible things were for the poor. And so she got a real sense of like righteousness about that from him talking about that. So when she was 6 years old, her father's father died. And so her father inherited a share of the family business, silk merchants, but he didn't want to be a merchant. He wanted something classier. So he decided to become a gentleman farmer, despite not having any skills at farming and being like a true nightmare person that no one's going to give any opportunities to. But he was like, here's what we're doing, growing family. So he took his family to live on a farm at Epping in Essex County. So compared to where they were living in London, Epping was like paradise to Mary. She's 6 years old, remember. And she discovers that, and this is a lifelong thing, she loves the outdoors. She loves being in the woods, going on the ponds and the swamps and the fields. And she spent as much time outside as she could, just like daydreaming and exploring. And I would suggest avoiding her abusive family. And so Mary, she did not like other girls, but she really wasn't. She had 2 younger sisters and they liked to play with dolls, and she did not like playing dolls. She liked climbing trees. She just liked to climb the tree and just like stare at the clouds for hours, just like really getting rejuvenation and like empowerment from being in nature. Also, when I say she's avoiding her abusive family, her brother, Ned, she described him later as the deputy tyrant of the house. So her dad is this horrible, abusive person. And then Ned is like his number one. So Ned, we need to talk about Ned. He tortured insects and small animals, as well as his younger siblings, including the baby. And he never got in trouble for this because like the dad was never there, right? He's either off drinking or he's off at his job trying to be a gentleman farmer. So the mother is ostensibly raising them, Elizabeth, but she was just like Ned hung the moon. Like he could never do anything wrong to her. So he never got in trouble. She never reprimanded him because he was the oldest son and she felt like this was his birthright. He could punish anyone who crossed him. So, Elizabeth, a victim certainly of the abusive relationship, but also part of this dysfunctional family system. So they lived for a year in Epping, and Edward figured out that like it was too far for him to get to a pub so he could drink. So they moved to the village, like from the farm to the village to be nearer to the pubs. And the more he drank, he became even more frightening, even more unpredictable. So some descriptions again from the Charlotte Gordon book. So sometimes he said he was like extravagantly loving, but he could just turn on a dime. So he would hug his wife and kiss his children, then suddenly like flip the table over or hit one of the kids. Or he'd be mad because their cat had knocked something over or the rain had blown in an open window. Like anything could set him off. Like, I'm sorry, babe, my cat's here. I'm like, I would never. If you knock something over, I would just love you for it. So one day, for no apparent reason, he hanged the family dog. He just killed the dog. So he is just like this, like you're living this uncertainty. This is the situation she's growing up in. And to Mary, the irrational nature of this act, like murdering the dog, just made it even more horrific. Like nothing was predictable, nothing was understandable. When she rebelled to her mother, she also like specifically found it especially distressing how her mother would punish her randomly. Like she'd do the same thing more than once. And one time her mother would like give her horrible punishment, and one time she wouldn't. Like it's just like, what are the rules? There are none. It's just chaos. He also assaulted Elizabeth constantly. He would rape her, the mother, and they're in this small house, so like all the kids can hear it. He would beat her so much she couldn't like stifle her screams. So Mary could hear this from her room in this small house happening constantly. And actually, when Mary got a bit older at this point, she's 6 years old. When she was like, I don't know, 10 or 12, 16, she tried to defend her mother. Like she would set up camp outside her mother's door, waiting for the father to come home so she could stop him from crossing the threshold to like protect her mother. This is her sense of like righteousness and justice. And especially, we see this a lot. I'm mentioning so much about her childhood because it really explains so much of her strongly held beliefs as an adult later on. Anyway, she's trying to protect her mother, but her mother knew that would just make the father more mad. Her father would just push her out of the way. Elizabeth would accuse Mary of just making the father even more upset, but Mary did not stop trying. Like night after night, she took this post as like bodyguard to her mom. So the next move that they made was they went to an expansive estate near Barking, a market town 8 miles east of London. And this was, Mary liked this, it was even better than Epping. So it's like, it sounds so idyllic. There's like meadows with sheep and cattle and gentle hills. And so again, she could just wander alone for hours. She was incredibly lonely as well, but she would have invisible imaginary friends she would hang out with in the fields. And this is kind of where she lived. Like this was, I'm not mentioning anything about her going to school or learning because in this era, for people of her class, like you were just taught by your parents, and her parents, you probably can get the sense of, didn't put much value on that. So she was not getting an education from school or from her parents, but just from like living life. Like this, she found that this brought her peace. Anyway, so eventually her dad's money gave out, and like he wasn't making money from any of his get rich quick schemes or from like cosplaying being a farmer. He just had inherited it from his father who died, and eventually that money ran out. So to avoid paying the landlord, he fled with his family. They fled north of England to a tiny village called Walkington, which was like a bit cheaper, like cheaper rent there. And so he kept trying to be a farmer, but he was bad at it. And also the weather was bad. We've talked in last season. The 18th century in England, in I think most of the world, but specifically we talked about England and France, the weather was horrible for farmers. They were in the little ice age. It was called, like, not climate change like we have now that's like caused by fossil fuels and stuff, but it was just kind of like the weather was horrible. It was a pretty terrible time to be a farmer, even if you knew how to be a farmer, and he didn't know how to be a farmer. So like the crops failed, the sheep sickened, and the more he felt despair, because remember, Edward was a guy who really felt he deserved a better life than he had. It just made him drink even more. And so that made him even more scary, abusive to everybody. And they were living in this small cottage. So it was hard for the children to get away from him because it's just a small space they were living in. In the summer of 1770, so this is when Mary is like 10 years old, Elizabeth had one more baby, which is a boy called Charles. Edward was like, okay, this is not working out. So he gave up the Walkington farm and moved to nearby Beverley. So Beverley, is that still a place in England? Let me know. It was at this point, so Mary had lived in like the slums. Like she lived in London, but all she ever saw was just this neighborhood she was in. Then these kind of like little villages, and now she's in Beverley, and she's like, oh my God, cosmopolitan. Like I've never seen anything so glamorous. Beverley, there's like shops here and streets. At this point, her older brother, Ned, good riddance, he left to go back to London to apprentice. He had been given schooling. I mentioned she didn't get school, but the only one in the family at this point who was sent to school was Ned, so he could get educated so he could become a lawyer, I think was the plan. And so Elizabeth was ill, depressed, not up to the task of raising her other 5 children. So this kind of left Mary to step in to sort of parent, even though the children, like her siblings, were not that much younger than she was. So they're in Beverley, the big city, and they were actually able to go to school because there was a school. But it was like a boys' school and a girls' school. And so her brothers went to the boys' school and they were learning history, mathematics, and Latin. The girls, so she had 2 sisters, Eliza and Evelina, who were younger than her. So the girls' school, they taught them needlework and simple addition. Mary was not down for this. She felt that it was really unfair. She writes about this later in her life, but just seeing like she was such a curious, intelligent person. She wanted to go to school and it wasn't provided for her, and that made her really mad. And also everybody made fun of her because she was kind of like gawky and, like you might imagine, weird. But she did make one very dear friend whose name was Jane Arden. So Jane Arden was a year older than Mary. And Mary was just like, oh my God, this is the coolest girl I've ever met. Just like kind of overwhelmed her with affection. And Jane was like, okay, we'll be friends. That's fine. Mary would write her these like really intense letters, just being like, you're not allowed to be friends with anybody else, only with me. And like, it's like, okay, like Mary is somebody who is doing the best she can in the situation she's in. And she would have really benefited from talk therapy, but that wasn't a thing at that time. We see this time and time again in her life. Like she just finds a person and just like is convinced that person loving her is going to be the solution to all of her problems. But luckily, Jane Arden was nice and she let Mary come and hang out with her at her house. And her father was sort of like this is like the Enlightenment era where it was seen as sort of respectable and cool and interesting for men to be interested in learning and science. And her father was like that. And he saw that Mary was like desperate for education. And so he'd been giving his kids sort of lessons at home as well as the school they're going to. And so Mary got to sit in on those lessons and she started learning stuff. She just like devoured every book he had in his library. But then, of course, they had to move again because that is what her whole life is like. When she was 15 years old, her father had found a fresh business opportunity. I mean, some sort of grift in a place called Hoxton. Don't know what it's like there now. At this time, it was a depressing village north of London, notorious for its 3 lunatic asylums. And they moved there in the winter, which is kind of like the most depressing time to move to kind of depressing place. Although her living there and seeing the people from these lunatic asylums really gave her some strongly held beliefs about how the insane should be treated more humanely. But anyway, she's 15. Hormones are coursing through her body. She's had this nightmare life up to this point. She's not near nature, so she can't reset all of her systems. And she burnt out. Like she had a teenage breakdown. She had stopped eating. She stopped washing her hair. Like she clearly, it's described sometimes as a breakdown. I see it as kind of like just a depressive episode, which she also has throughout her life. And so she stopped eating, she stopped washing her hair. She suffered from headaches, fevers, and nervous fits. Like her girl is just, she's not okay. She also was not sleeping. She stayed up most of the night brooding. So during the day, she was exhausted. Like this is similar, I think, to how her father would have been at this age, maybe too. And he eventually just turned to drinking to deal with this depression, with these feelings of just like the world is not right and I can see it, but I don't know how to fix it. And she turned to education and reading. That's what she did with this kind of energy. And she was able to, so one of her neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Clare. So Mrs. Clare just saw this like brooding girl who was like not okay and invited her over for tea. And she found that Mary was just like interesting and just like starving for books and education and knowledge. And so her husband, the Reverend Henry Clare, had a whole bunch of libraries. And so Mary was able to read his books. They actually invited her to come stay with them for weeks at a time. And so she just stayed there and she just like read books and learned stuff. One of these times when she was staying with them, they went to a nearby village to visit their friends of the family, a family with the excellent last name, Blood. Good for a Halloween episode. Like this is their family friends, Mr. and Mrs. Blood and their kids, but their oldest daughter was Fanny Blood. So she's like Mary, the oldest sister of a large brood of children. She's 18. Mary is 15 at this point. And Mr. Blood, like Mary's dad, was an alcoholic and a gambler. He was not violent, but he could not earn a living. So the way this family supported themselves was Mrs. Blood took in small sewing jobs, but really the thing that really got them through was Fanny herself was a really talented artist. So she'd been hired by a botanist to draw wildflower specimens, like illustrations for this book that he was making, this 2-volume series. So this was the first time Mary Wollstonecraft saw like women having jobs, the power of female resourcefulness, like women finding ways to earn money to like, she just didn't know this was possible. You know, it's like, there's some things when you don't, until you know someone who does it, you don't know that anyone could do it. And also she was like really entranced by Fanny. She was like this, like, she's not with Jane Arden anymore. And she's just like, oh my God, this girl is the coolest person I've ever seen in my life. There are some speculations that she was in love with her. I think that's not an exaggeration. She had like such a crush on Fanny Blood. And I was going to say, you know, like there's so many stories in history where it's like, oh, well, this was a time where like it was really fashionable for women to write really romantic letters to each other. And it was. So there's that. Who knows how Mary would describe her sexuality at this point? But I will say, well, in 2025, I mean, but in whatever, when 17, whatever, she would not have described her sexuality. And I know that because she wrote a lot about this later. And she really didn't, she was not interested in sex stuff for quite a while. But she was just like, she loved Fanny Blood. She loved being with her. Like it's like a soulmate type connection, I think is what she feels. So they lived in separate villages, so they couldn't be together all the time, but they got permission to become pen pals. And Mary began to dream of a new future. She was just like, this is how I'm going to escape my shitty life. I want to break away with my family, but I don't want to get married because men are abusive assholes. That's all I've ever seen men do and be. But she's like, what I want to do is set up a household, me and Fanny, like just me and her, just 2 gal pals, just gals being pals. Set up a household together where they could just have lots of books and read and study without interruption and live as equals. And like each of them could like learn from each other to like get new personality traits and whatever. But, you know, this is Mary's dream. Something getting in the way is the fact that Fanny was in fact engaged to be married to a man whose name was Hugh Skays. So he had courted her for more than a year. And then she agreed to marry him. And then he's like, great, peace out. I'm going to Portugal. So they're engaged, but he's in Portugal. Like he gave her a portrait of himself and then went off to supervise his business concerns. He said, I'll marry you once I'm certain of my financial future. And this is apparently going to take years. So she's engaged, but it's like, is she really? But the thing is that kind of all the men in this story, and there will be some okay ones later, but Hugh, it's like, at least he was like, I don't want to marry you. I don't want to like nail you down to this until I can promise that I can actually support you, which is like more than Mary's dad ever did. But also Mary knew she could not offer Fanny this kind of economic support. She was not a man. She couldn't run a business. the only employment possibilities for people like her, who are technically, like, she was not low class, she was not high class, she was truly like middle class, like working class. And she didn't have a talent like Fanny, or she didn't know she did yet. So the only things she could really do were just like low paying positions. It's like teacher, governess, lady's companion. And none of those appealed to her, because you might have gotten the sense that Mary was like really hated authority figures and was kind of an asshole. And I say that as someone who is an asshole who doesn't really deal well with authority figures. Like, yeah, if I had to be a lady's companion, I don't know if I could hack that either. Anyway, but she's like, this is what the options are, so let's do it. How can I make an income so I can live my life dream of living with my best friend forever? So she got a job being the paid companion to an older widow named Mrs. Dawson, who lived in Bath. So by this point, we're getting up into like 1770s, I think. So Bath is like a hopping town. Like, all the rich people like to go there. It's this spa town where you go to take the waters, which we've talked about on the podcast before, which means to like soak in like mineral salt waters, but also like to drink mineral salt waters. So lots of rich people were there. And so Mary went there and she's just like, fuck this. Because this is like the early Marie Antoinette era over in France is what's happening. So everybody's wearing the poof hairstyles. Like, Mrs. Dawson made Mary powder her hair. For the record, this is yet another person on this podcast who is described as having like reddish gold hair. This isn't a video, so you can't see me, but just like listeners know, I have reddish gold hair. And I'm not intentionally choosing to talk about people in the podcast who look like me, but a lot of them do, because I look like a really typical British person. Anyway, so she's just like these bitches with their like poof hairstyles. Like, if you picture the ostentatious Queen Charlotte, what she wears on Bridgerton, like the big wide skirts, the really ornate stuff. And Mary is just like, fuck this, fuck rich people, down with the 1%. I hate it here. So she's not thriving being a lady's companion. I don't know if this is the companionship Mrs. Dawson wanted. But anyway, ultimately, her sisters wrote to her being like, our mom is sick. You need to come home, please. And so she did. So her mother, Elizabeth, was now effectively bedridden with edema, I think is the issue, where you just like the fluid gathers in your body. Like, her mother needed round the clock care. And so Mary came home to provide that, even though she hated her mother. And she did this for the next 2 years until her mother died. 2 days after the mother died, her father came home with his new wife, Lydia, who had been his mistress for a while, apparently. And 6 months later, in a situation that still happens today, where a young woman just really wants to escape an abusive household, they just run off and get married because at least they can leave. That's a way to get some sort of freedom. So her 19-year-old sister, Eliza, 6 months after the mother died, Eliza got married to a shipbuilder named Meredith Bishop. Bear in mind, Meredith is a man's name at this time. And she had a daughter pretty much right away. Like, within the year, Eliza had a daughter who she called Mary after her sister. And so she had the daughter in, I think, August. 3 months later, Meredith, the man, wrote a letter to Mary just being like, can you come check on your sister? She has gone insane. And the vibes of this are very like Crimson Peak adjacent, where it's just like, oh, I married this person and now she's gone insane. I totally didn't do anything to her. Like, she's just insane now. So Mary went to check on her sister and she saw that Eliza was like not okay. Obviously she's a 19-year-old who just had a baby. Nobody knows at this point, like postpartum, like people did know that there's like baby blues, like sometimes often after somebody has a baby, there's a period of depression. But Eliza was like not, it was very extreme what she was going through, her various symptoms. It's just like, what's going on with her? So, and in this situation in England in 17 whatever, up until England in 19 whatever, so a husband had full rights over the wife. Like, if he decided to send her to an insane asylum, he just could. She wouldn't have any say in it. So Mary, like, they lived in that lunatic asylum town, and she was just like, I want to go and help my sister. Like, we should be compassionate to the insane. So she went to stay with her sister, but she was like, I can't leave. Like, she is not okay. But so at first she was just like, oh, childbirth is so traumatic. Like, of course, she's like dealing with that whole thing. But then she came to see that how her sister, like when Meredith came around, her sister would sort of like her behavior would change. She'd kind of freeze up or like cringe. And Mary was like, oh, God damn it, Meredith is abusive. And so she's like, well, I couldn't save my mother from our abusive father, but I'm going to goddamn save my sister. So with the same like energy of a teenage Mary standing bodyguard outside her mother's room, she's like, I'm going to liberate my sister from this shitty situation. So she got going. Like at the end of this, well, spoilers, this is a 2-part episode. At the end of the Mary Wollstonecraft saga, we're going to give her marks in various categories. One of them is scheminess. And I will say this is a girl with a plan. So she it's like she was constantly like, if anyone I know is being abused, this is what she's like, not me, but her. But she's just like on the lookout for anyone she knows being abused. And if they're being abused, she's like, initiate plan Alpha Omega 3. Like, we're doing it. Like, it's happening. So she reserved a room in a lodging house in Hackney, a village about 5 miles north of central London, under an assumed name. She stashed supplies with their other sister, Everina. So at this point, her evil brother, Ned, is a lawyer now. And her other sister, Everina, is staying with Ned on the other side of London. So she got them to like hide some supplies, like some, I don't know, clothes or whatever. She gathered up as much cash as she could. And then was just like, Eliza, babe, here's what's happening. We're going to escape. Eliza seemed to be open to the situation, but she was understandably distraught because what I didn't mention is that they have to leave the baby behind because fathers had complete rights over children. Mothers had no. If a wife left a husband, she couldn't take the baby with her. So in order to free Eliza, they would have to abandon little baby Mary. But you know what? This is happening. This is what we need to do. So on an overcast January day, they were ready. Meredith left the house after lunch, and Mary went to hail a coach or like a hackney cab, like a taxi. And so at first they were driving away from the house, and it's like, okay, this is great. Like, we're getting away. It's happening. This is good. But it was a busy, rush hour. So it was hard to avoid traffic. And each time the carriage had to stop, Eliza was getting more and more concerned. When I said her postpartum was manifesting in she was not okay, where it's like, is she losing her mind? Like, she started getting so upset, she started chewing, gnawing on her ring on her finger. She eventually chewed the ring off her finger. This is the behavior that's concerning everybody around her. Anyway, so they switched coaches just in case Meredith was following them. It took an hour of tense travel, but eventually they arrived to their lodging house. Meredith contacted Ned to be like, oh, please, when my wife come back. Eliza was like, hell no. And then Meredith was furious at being rejected. So he refused to let Eliza see the daughter, cut her off without any money. And a few months later, the daughter died of presumably neglect. So this is a dire, grimdark saga. And this is just to remember, Mary Wollstonecraft, we're just still early in her story, but this is the mother of Mary Shelley. Mother and daughter, there's a lot of infant mortality in these stories. So, which could lead someone to invent the genre of horror fiction eventually, which Mary Shelley did. Anyway, so now they're just spinsters. Well, Eliza is it's kind of ruined the family name. Eliza is not going to be able to get another husband because divorce isn't possible. And so she's technically still married to Meredith. The other sister, Evelina, no one's going to marry her because now the Wollstonecrafts, it's so scandalous. It's in Pride and Prejudice when Lydia runs away. It's this will ruin her whole family. So this did. Mary didn't want to get married anyway. But anyway, there's no men in the picture and they need to get jobs. And I mentioned before the various jobs they could get were governess, teacher, ladies' companion. And Mary was like, well, what if we could be teachers plus? What if we could open our own school? This had been her dream for a while. Partially because her old friend Jane had opened a school, and Mary was like, that sounds great. You could be the boss of the place. You can help nurture the next generation of girls to be feminist, strong, educated people who know more than just stitching. So part of why she wanted to open the school as well, spending these weeks, growing up in her own house, but then also spending the time in Eliza and Meredith's house. She realized her mother and Eliza both had this trait, which Mary Wollstonecraft described as weakness. When a wife is so frightened of the husband, it's hard to get a woman like that, she thought, to stand up to their husbands. So she wanted to teach girls to be like her. She wanted to teach them to just be strong assholes who would defend themselves. So this is where she felt she wanted to open a school to give girls an education, but also to elevate them their self-confidence so they could feel like you don't have to stay in a shitty marriage, which like this society you kind of need to. Anyway, these are her goals. She's a woman ahead of her time. And so she wanted to teach the girls to become independent women. And she thought that like if she could do this, eventually enough girls would be taught this would change society. So it would be a society where wives could defend themselves. Single women could exist on their own terms. Everyone didn't have to be in a shitty marriage. Someone like Eliza would never have to be rescued. Like they could rescue themselves. There'd be social supports that would help them. This is her goal. It's a great goal, but she needs, people investing in this. So she needed money. She needed a building. Like, how is she she needs students. But then there's a number of people who just like help her out. And I appreciate that in this story because there's a lot of people living similar shitty lives who don't find people who help them out. But she, as much as like there's so much shitty going on in this story, like she is lucky in several circumstances. And one of them is that she met a woman called Mrs. Burr. So she was a wealthy widow of the educator and author James Burr, who was a well-known activist for educational reform. So she was just like, I want to fund a school. I just need to find somebody to run it. And Mary Wollstonecraft is like, killer, great. I will run your school, Mrs. Burr. And so it's like, it's perfect. So Mrs. Burr would supply Mary with a house that could become the school and 20 students that she'd already had lined up. And Mary would be free to run the school as she wished, which is beyond ideal. So the only requirement that Mrs. Burr had was that she said to supply the building, but she's like, the building has to be in my own village, Newington Green. And so Newington Green, this becomes important too. So at that time, it was a place for like rebels and like independent thinkers to hang out. So nonconformists would hang out there. So the residents of Newington Green were among the most radical in 18th century England. So Mary's about to meet a bunch of cool and helpful people. So she brought her sisters with her to be teachers, even though Everina, I think I call her Everina and Eliza. Everina is 19, so she's potentially not even that much older than the students, but she's just like, come on, girls, like, I'm giving you a job. Like for her whole life, Mary Wollstonecraft was just like, she wanted to get enough money for herself to live, but she was also always looking out for her sisters. She also convinced her soulmate gal pal, Fanny Blood, to come and be the art teacher. So remember, Fanny's fiance, Hugh, was still in Portugal years later, still just being like, yeah, no, working on my finances, babe. I promise I'll marry you when I have money. Don't worry about it. And Fanny was just like, yeah, I want to hang out with my bestie and like teach art lessons. Fanny, note, did have tuberculosis, but at this point in this era, who didn't? But she would just teach just a few classes a week, like not too much. It wouldn't be too arduous for her. Although towards the end of the school's first year, just as winter's kind of hitting and it's like Newington Green, it's a damp place, England, all of the British Isles, really. So not a great place to be a person with tuberculosis. So her tuberculosis was getting worse, and it seemed apparent that if she stayed in England where it was like damp and chilly, she would die of tuberculosis. The whole thing was tuberculosis. We've talked about this in other previous podcasts. John Green has that book as well. But you want to be somewhere kind of hot and dry. That is helpful for you. So, it's hot and dry, Portugal. So Mary was like, Fanny, I think you need to go like in touch with Hugh, like put a ring on it, just like move to Lisbon and be in Portugal so you don't die. And Mary kind of convinced her to do that. And so Fanny did. So she went to Portugal, she married Hugh, and 1 month into the marriage, she was pregnant, which Mary was concerned about. Well, having already seen her mother go through all these like pregnancies, but then also how Eliza had this traumatic pregnancy. And also like it's the 1700s and lots of like dying in childbirth is a real ongoing concern for somebody who doesn't have tuberculosis. But if you have, like, if you already are weakened from your chronic illness, this could be deadly. So she wanted to go to Fanny to be with her and like support her. But she's like, I can't leave the school in my sister's hands because like I personally, I'm speaking for me, not Mary Wollstonecraft. I, the host of this podcast, have a soft spot for Everina and Eliza, who, I'm a younger sister, they're a younger sister, and they're just kind of like trying to have a nice time. And Mary Wollstonecraft is the one who's like, let's change society. And Everina and Eliza are like, what? But she knew that these two weren't up to the task of running the school in her absence. They did not have that skill set. So she's like, if I leave the school, the school's going to suffer and maybe the students are going to leave and maybe that'll make the school fail. But then she's like, oh, but I need to go be with Fanny. Eventually, she was just like so distressed about her friend. She got money from Mrs. Burr to book passage to Lisbon. So it was a 13-day voyage. She arrived just as Fanny was going into labor. In fact, literally. So 4 hours after Mary walked through the door, Fanny gave birth to a boy. And she was not doing well, not thriving from this birth. She, in fact, was dead by the end of the week. And so was the baby. And this was an incredibly devastating loss for Mary. And now for a quick advertising break. Fall is here, and with it comes cooler nights, heartier meals, and the craving for something warm and satisfying. That's where HelloFresh comes in, bringing you comforting, chef-designed recipes and fresh seasonal ingredients right to your door. This season, they've taken things to the next level with their biggest menu refresh yet. Say hello to a whole new way to do dinner. That's right. HelloFresh has doubled its menu. You can choose from 100 options each week, including new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world. You can even dig into bigger portions that'll keep everyone satisfied. And I just want to let you know, in my box this week, because I do in fact use HelloFresh, they have Halloween themed things, and one of them is a meal that's like stuffed red peppers, but you can carve little jack-o'-lantern faces on the peppers. How cute is that? You know, I like a little whimsy with my food, and you're going to get that with that meal. And also, if you're not whimsical, other kinds of meals too. The best way to cook just got better. Go to hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm now to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. One box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm to get 10 free meals and a free item for life.
You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. If you've shopped online, it's extremely likely that you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes the process from, I think I'm ready to buy, to, I can't wait till it gets here, so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. It gives you a leg up from the very beginning, with hundreds of beautiful, ready-to-go templates to express your brand style, so you don't have to spend time coding a website. Shopify allows you to tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. Plus, they have built-in marketing and email tools to help find and keep new customers, so you can easily spread your brand's word. And did I mention that iconic purple Shop Pay button that's used by millions of businesses around the world? It's the reason why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. Your customers already know it, love it, and actually use it. If you want to see less carts being abandoned, it's time for you to head over to Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. Shopify.com/realm. Fall is my favorite time of the year, and whenever it comes around, I'm making sure I'm bringing out my softest blankets, I'm making my favorite soups, really any excuse to use my immersion blender, and just generally making small adjustments in my day-to-day life to reflect the coziness and inherent transitional nature of the season. I love switching things up this time of the year, and that can include updating your makeup look. From a simple just gotta get out the door routine to festive fall glam or maybe even a Halloween look, Thrive Cosmetics is your go-to for completing any fall look. Plus, every product is 100% vegan, cruelty-free, and made with clean, skin-loving ingredients that work with your skin, not against it. My personal favorite product that I absolutely recommend adding to your makeup bag if you haven't already is the Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara. It's the only mascara I wear anymore. I have it in a brown shade, which just feels a little less harsh than a black mascara. And it's a tubing mascara, so it doesn't run or smudge, and it just makes my lashes look so beautiful and long without any clumping. My favorite part, because I got so tired of working hard to get every last bit of makeup off when I was using other mascaras, when it's time to take it off, it just slides right off with warm water. And something I love about Thrive Causemetics is that purchasing their products does more than enhance your own glow. With every purchase, Thrive Causemetics makes a donation to numerous causes, and they've given over $150 million in product and cash donations to more than 600 giving partners, so it really is beauty with purpose. Whether you're doing a total overhaul or just making the tweaks in your life to feel in line with the season, complete your fall look. Go to thrivecosmetics.com/thrive for an exclusive offer of 20% off your first order. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive.
And we're back. She returned to London, because what else is she going to do? And she found, as she had suspected, the school was failing in her absence. But without Fanny, like in the world, Mary didn't care anymore. She didn't care about anything else. She blamed herself for Fanny's death. If she hadn't encouraged her to go to Portugal, maybe Fanny would still be with her. The students would still be flourishing, and she wouldn't have to worry about finding money for herself and her sisters. Here's something she wrote about this time. My hopes of happiness are extinct. And in fact, the school closed at the end of that academic year. So the school had closed. And even though Mrs. Burr had provided so much money for the school, Mary had borrowed money to cover her own expenses, and her sister's expenses and creditors were now demanding payment. And she's just like, I don't know what to do. Like, she's like depressed. She is like, wanted to change society. It didn't work, but she needs to support her sisters. And one of her friends suggested maybe she should write a book. And he described this in a Christian specific way that appealed to Mary at this time, who was Anglican. So just the concept that it was her God-given duty to devote herself to her studies. It was her Christian obligation to go back to work, and then Fanny would want Mary to continue her mission to reform education. And Mary was like, great, I'm going to write a book about how to educate girls. So she wanted people to understand everything that all the injustices that she felt so clearly, that were so impactful to her. She wanted people to understand how difficult it was for single women to support themselves, which she sort of connected with, well, to everything, like to her, the fact that her sister had to marry Meredith, the struggle she's having, but also Fanny. Like, if Fanny had been able to make more money, she wouldn't have had to have married Hugh, and then she wouldn't have gotten pregnant, and maybe she wouldn't have died. So she's just like fueled by this like raging sense of injustice, and this like brought her energy back. Like, she's just like fighting the good fight. She reminds me of like Jane Fonda in this way. So she wrote 49 pages, and the book is called Thoughts on the Education of Daughters, with Reflections on Female Conduct in the More Important Duties of Life. So this was like a serious like treatise. She's giving advice, but she also wanted to assert her own rights as a woman, to show like, look, women can have brains and stuff. And so one of the chapters is called The Unfortunate Situation of Females Fashionably Educated and Left Without a Fortune, which is kind of like her situation, her sister's situation, Fanny as well. Like, she just wanted to explain, like, the people who read stuff like this were men, but the people who could change society and make decisions were also men. So she's writing this for men to read and to understand that, like, oh, maybe we should educate women. So her ideas for this time, in terms of what was being published, very original. And also the way that she wrote it was very original. This podcast is called Vulgar History. And what that means is like the vulgar tongue is a phrase that just kind of means like talking like the everyday way that people talk, instead of talking in a really highfalutin academic way. And that's kind of what Mary was up to as well. She was talking in a really approachable way. Like, she hadn't gone to like Oxford or whatever. She had read a lot, but she wanted to write in a way that anyone could understand. So she was writing in this original way. Her ideas were very progressive. So this is 1786, and no one before her had published about the suffering of young women seeking independence, except for people writing like, oh, make sure they don't turn into sex workers. So Mary was asking questions in this writing, like, who is the ideal woman? Was she a fainting maiden, easily fatigued and naive? No, the ideal woman would be a resourceful, intelligent human being. And she said that until women's talents were cultivated and they were educated, no one would know what women were even capable of. And she's saying like training girls to just be like society hostesses was bad for the girls / for everyone, because it raised a generation of young women who were unable to support their husbands in times of crisis. They were people who maybe wouldn't be able to raise their children effectively. They couldn't contribute to their communities. This is what people still say now about educating girls. It's like when you educate girls, you educate everybody. And she's saying this in 1786. And so again, people are helping her out, and I appreciate this for her. So a friend of a friend was the most famous publisher in London, Joseph Johnson, publisher of books by people like Benjamin Franklin. And he got it. He saw like, oh, this book has commercial potential, but also he was like a radical person who wanted to like promote progressive thoughts. And he was like, can you come to my offices to like discuss the possibility of publication? Because there's not phones, there's not emails. This is not, I wrote a book. I have not gone to talk about publication with my publisher, but we've talked on Zoom many times. So Mary went in person. Like as soon as she got this message, she like hailed a taxi and like went right there to his offices. And he was like, okay, I'm going to give you £10 for your manuscript, which is like $1,000 today, or maybe $10,000 today. It's like a good amount of money. And she was just like, oh my God, like not only is this guy going to publish my book, but like he's the guy. Like his endorsement means everything. Like people read whatever he publishes because people respect him so much. And then he was like, I like this. And I like, you've got moxie. So he's just like, whatever you write next, please send it to me. I'll consider publishing anything you write. You seem great. This is honestly the dream of every writer, even today. And so Mary Wollstonecraft was suddenly just like, oh my God, like this could be a path for me. Like she's a 27-year-old single woman, and she's on the cusp of maybe a real literary career, like not just like writing books for fun, but like actually being able to support herself from the money from writing. But until she actually, finished her edits and wrote another book, like she wasn't, it's like, well, the possibility is there, but she can't actually do the career yet. So she needed like a job for now. Like I work a 9 to 5 as well as doing this podcast and writing books. She needed another job. So she got a job, remember the 3 things. It's like companion, governess, teacher. So this time she got a job as a governess for Robert and Caroline King of Mitchelston, Ireland. They didn't know what she was like. They were like fancy rich people, and they thought that she would do what they wanted, and that is not what she was like. She was in fact even more radical than ever. Like the summer before she went to start this job, instead of studying like how to, I don't know, art or French or whatever, she'd been studying like radical philosophy. So she showed up, and at first the girls, like, it was a real Sound of Music situation. They were like pulling pranks on her and stuff. But then the girls fell ill, and Mary saw that the mother just avoided them and didn't want to be around them. And she was just like, oh, this another shitty mother in this goddamn story. So she went and like nursed the girls, and then they came to love her. And then she like, it's a real Sound of Music vibe. / Mary Poppins. She just kind of trained them to be little radicals, and they loved her. And she's like, it's important going outside, being in nature. And then when she saw that they were kind of spoiled, she's like, let's go spend time with poor people so you understand what that's like. And so, in fact, the older sister, so there's 2 girls, I forget the name of the younger sister, but the older one is called Margaret. And she like really became like a mini Mary Wollstonecraft. And she looked at her parents kind of going on strike. She's like, I demand education. I don't want to be married off. The parents were just like, what is happening in our house? Around the same time, Mary also started writing a novel called Mary. We had another episode a while ago about Germaine de Stael, who is also a woman writer in around the same time period, who also wrote novels about people who are kind of exactly like her. But Mary wanted to write her thoughts about like the role of women in society and maybe put it in a novel, because maybe some different people would read that versus who reads her like nonfiction. Ultimately, as you might imagine, she got fired from this job because she argued with the mistress so much and was training the girls to be like suffragettes effectively. And just like asterisks, later on in history, so Mary Wollstonecraft has a daughter who is Mary Shelley. And then when Mary Shelley was an adult, she looked up and she found Margaret. And she's just like, hey, you knew my mother. Like, what was that like? And Margaret was just like, oh my God, she was the coolest governess. What Margaret said was, quote, she freed her mind from all superstitions. Margaret did end up having an unhappy marriage, but instead of resigning herself to just like a shitty life and a shitty marriage, Margaret remembered what Mary Wollstonecraft taught her as a girl. She rebelled, disguised herself as a man to train as a doctor in Germany, then moved to Italy with her lover. Like Margaret, hell yes. Like that's exactly, well, maybe not exactly, but to me, I think kind of exactly what Mary Wollstonecraft would have wanted your life to be. Training as a doctor in disguise, moving with a lover to Italy. Anyway, that's an aside. But Mary was just like, you know what? Good riddance. Like, I finished reading my novel. Johnson had said like he would publish my next thing. And so she brought it to him and he's like, this novel is great. I will publish that. And like, whatever you write next, I will also publish that. And he like assured her, like, if you work like diligently, you could earn enough money to live on if you just like keep writing. And she's like, yeah, but like I currently don't have money and also all this debt from like the school situation. And Johnson was like, that's fine. Why don't you just stay with me until you find a suitable accommodation? And you might think, oh, he's a creep. He's a perv. This is going to go badly. No, he's another nice person who just truly supported her as like a father figure, but like brackets complimentary, like an actual older man actually nurturing and helping this person in a mentorship way. Thank God. So less than a year after she had arrived in London, both of her books were published. Johnson published Mary and also her second book, which is called Original Stories from Real Life. Mary, the novel, did not receive much notice from critics. It's kind of like a trashy gothic romance novel, which I would like, but critics at the time were not hot about. But her book, Original Stories from Real Life, it's more like advice on education, basically. Became a staple of the advice literature on the moral development of children for almost 50 years. So it became like her ideas were good. And she was just like, I will take any writing job you have for me, Johnson. Thank you. He's like, well, could you translate this book? It's in French. She's like, yes. And then she like quickly learned French. And the book itself was by a French finance minister whose name you might know, Jacques Necker, father of Germaine de Stael, who I just mentioned. So he wrote this thing called The Significance of Religious Theories. And I like this part. She also translated a book, I think it was in Swedish or German, and where there's parts where she clearly just didn't know what the word meant. She just kind of like made up her own stuff. Nobody knew that she was the author of those parts. So people just kind of assumed that Jacques Necker was saying these things, and using like as an example, a woman called Mary, who's like a feminist. But anyway, so she's making money from that, improving her French, learning about the French situation, which at this point is like leading up to the French Revolution era. So Johnson started a magazine. Magazines were like a new thing. There's like newspapers, there's pamphlets, but magazines is a new thing. So he started a magazine called The Analytical Review. Each issue was like 100 pages long. And he hired her to review romance novels for his magazine. And soon between all this, she was making enough money to A, support herself, B, support her sisters, and C, pay off her debts. So she was translating this French thing. She's learning about the French financial crisis. Everybody was talking about France at this point. So because the country was in crisis, it's like the pre-French Revolution era. Like she arrived in London in 1786, I think. So her third summer in London was 1789, which is like when the French Revolution kind of kicks off. And with the storming of the Bastille prison, which we talked about in numerous podcast episodes last season on the Vulgar History podcast. So the Bastille prison, there's like 6 prisoners in there. And like 10,000 people came and killed all the guards and freed those people. And it was sort of a major declaration of like, oh, the people of Paris just like have no fucks to give and they will murder anybody and until they get a revolution. So Mary had previously compared her time being the governess. She described that as like, she felt like that was like the Bastille, but for her. So this had like a personal feel. She's like, oh my God, I'm free from being a governess. The prisoners from the Bastille are free. Liberty has triumphed over aristocratic tyranny. She wrote, the destruction of the Bastille was an event that hailed the dawn of a new day, and freedom, like a lion roused from his lair, rose with dignity and calmly shook herself. She was also undergoing a personal transformation. I mentioned before with the whole Fanny Blood situation, like were they lesbians? I think certainly she was in love with Fanny Blood. But the reason I know that they did not do anything sexual is because Mary Wollstonecraft didn't believe that sex was a thing that she was interested in until now. So she had met this guy. So her publisher, Johnson, who she's living with in a non-romantic way, had dinner parties all the time with like philosophers and the great thinkers and whatever. And one of Johnson's closest friends and maybe lover was a 49-year-old Swiss artist called Henry Fuseli. Fuseli only liked to talk about sex. His paintings he's an artist. His paintings were very sexual. They featured like the imps nuzzling the bare breasts of fairies, naked Greek gods flexing their muscles, and what is described as lascivious witches. So he just makes this like sexy art. All he likes to do is talk about sex. He's also sleeping with everybody of any gender. And at first, Mary was just like, she did not accept the idea that sexuality could be a positive thing. She'd only experienced it as a negative thing. Like sex to her was like the only sexual activity she was familiar with was just like women getting pregnant and then dying, or like her father assaulting her mother. She just like sex was not a positive thing as far as she knew. But Fuseli was just like, no, listen. So like after the dinner parties, they would just talk to each other. Like they just talk late into the night. And he was explaining like, no sex act should be taboo. He explained to her like all the sex acts that he did with all the people of all different genders. He had a former lover who was a Protestant priest, and he fucked him, but he also fucked the priest's like niece. He's maybe fucking Johnson. He had a wife also, and he was just like, women like should be able to express their sensuality. He's like, masturbation is important. Human sexuality needs to be lifted out of the gutter and honored as the life force that it is. I just want to mention as well, he's an artist, so he does this like sexy art, but he also had like a collection of kind of pornography pictures. One of which was women with phallic coiffures. So like we talked about the poofs in the Mary Antoinette episode. So I presume these are women with big wigs shaped like genitalia. I don't know. So he was like, just so you know, he's just this like sex guy. He's not conventionally attractive. He was like kind of short and kind of funny looking, but his powers of seduction were legendary. Like it didn't matter what he looked like. Like this guy knew about fucking. So you might think like, wow, this is how Mary Wollstonecraft learns about sex. It is, but she does not do sex. She just learns with him. She's just like, wow, I love the intellectual stimulation of talking to this person. And she kind of like, again, like she's like glums onto a person. She's like, this is my person now. So the French Revolution is happening in France. A guy called Edmund Burke, who is one of the great writers of the era, wrote a thing condemning the French Revolution. So he just wrote this thing being like, French Revolution sucks. We should all respect the social order. Kings are great, like whatever. And Mary Wollstonecraft was like horrified by this because she had read everything, like all these philosophical things. And she knew 20 years ago, the same guy, Edmund Burke, had supported the American Revolution, saying that like, this is so important. Like liberty for the United States is so important. And so she's just like, why is this guy, this former champion of freedom, arguing against the greatest revolution of all time, the French Revolution? And she was just like, I'm so mad about this. I need to like write a treatise, which she did. So she's going to write a rebuttal to what he had written, Burke. So she proposed this idea to Johnson, and he's like, hell yeah, Lois Lane, do it. He's just like, first of all, like as a revolutionary person myself, I support this, but also as your publisher, people are going to buy this. So like haters are going to buy it, and also people who like it are going to buy it. So like this is yes in all different directions. She's like, okay, if I write this, will you print it as soon as I can write it? And he's like, yes. But he said, I won't reveal your identity because people, if they know it's a woman, maybe they won't like take you seriously. Because when she wrote her book reviews, they were always just signed as MW, so people didn't know it was a woman writing them. Anyway, she wrote this so quickly that it was able to be published 28 days after Burke's thing had come out. And this was a document or a piece that she called A Vindication on the Rights of Men. And she was like, other people who had responses to what Burke had written were also writing rebuttals, but hers was the first. She wrote faster than any of the other people. And within 3 weeks, it had completely sold out the whole print run. So they're like, wow, we're going to do a second print run. And everybody was really positive about it, like philosophers type people. So Johnson and Mary were like, you know what? When we reprint this, let's put your name on it so everyone knows who wrote this. A woman. We think that society is ready for this. Society not ready for this. The critics, people who had originally said like, wow, what a great treatise this is, were now like, oh, actually, this is terrible. This book is incoherent and absurd. Mary Wollstonecraft, obviously a whore, those sorts of things. Like she knew that people were going to say stuff like that. It's like when I say some stuff on the podcast, I'm like, I know someone's going to say something dumb and mansplaining in my comments. And they do, but I'm prepared for that. So whatever. So she knew that like she was like really pushing the boundaries here. But she was just like, no, I want to stand behind my own ideas. I want to know it's me writing these things. And like, God damn it. So she made like like, the book sold out. Then there's a second book, and the second printing also sold out. She had like now more money than she'd ever made before. Like she was killing it. She's like, whatever, I don't know, Allie Hazelwood of her time, making so much money. She made so much money that she bought new furniture, adopted a cat. There's so many dogs in this podcast, in these stories of olden times. I like that she adopted a cat. She's like, oh my God, I'm so rich. Now I can finally have a cat. She got new furniture, adopted a cat. She was able to really provide for her sister. She helped arrange like jobs for them. I think they got jobs as one of the big three: teachers, governess, companions, whatever. But she was just like taking care of her family, taking care of herself. She moved to a house. I don't know if she's renting. I assume she's renting it and not buying it. But still, this house is in Bloomsbury on Store Street. It's larger and more gracious than her rooms she'd been staying with before, like because she'd been like couch surfing with Johnson, right? And people flocked to her doorstep. She was suddenly like the most famous person. People wanted to see, where's this Mary Wollstonecraft who wrote this thing? Who's this like woman who says things? Like people just came to her door for her autograph, I guess. One of her admirers named William Roscoe commissioned a portrait to be painted of her. The famous artist John Opie also asked to paint her. She's like, wow, I've made it. Like one day this portrait will be in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Listeners, it is. And I saw it there and it was great. It's on the same wall as a painting of her daughter, Mary Shelley. So, but she's not someone who's ever had a portrait done before. So she had to think about like, what do I want my look to be? Both in this portrait, but also when people come to see me on the street as a famous celebrity. So she's like, well, I'm this outspoken champion of feminism, a word that doesn't exist yet. And like, how do I want to look? So she is, like I mentioned, she has like kind of red blonde hair. She's described consistently by people who met her as just like, she's pretty, like she's nice looking. If she dressed in a very conventional, typical way, people would be like, wow, there's a beauty. But she's like, I don't want that kind of attention. I want people to take me seriously. Kind of like Pamela Anderson not wearing makeup. She's just like, I'm just going to go au naturel. So she just wears her hair kind of loose and down instead of like, curling it or whatever. She didn't style her hair. She just kind of like, woke up in the morning, brushed it or whatever. She didn't put on any rouge. She didn't want to wear a frilly gown. So what she does is she like partially pins up her hair, kind of a messy bun type look. So she didn't want a frilly gown, but she wanted like a cool dress. So she got expensive dresses made of like rich fabric. So just like a plain black dress, but like with beautiful, it's a really nice fabric. So for the portrait, the Roscoe portrait, she wore just black, no lace, no pink, nothing frilly, on a plain white sort of wrap tucked into the bodice. She's just kind of like, hey, it's me. Don't worry about it. I'm just like, it's like beyond clean girl era. It's just kind of like, fuck you era. And I love that this is her look. And when you see her portraits, that makes sense. Because when you see them, it's just like this, she looks different from other people, but it's like, that's her look she chose. January 1792. Her next work is published, A Vindication on the Rights of Women. Perhaps you've heard of it if you've ever taken a women's studies course. So this was delivered to bookshops and lending libraries. And this is where, like, her other one was about, like, why the French Revolution is a good thing, the rights of man, etc. And this one, she's just like, what's the thing from Hamilton where she's like, put women in the sequel? This is what she's writing. Putting women in the sequel. Vindication on the Rights of Women. So she's like, the real problem, she's like, of trying to make women behave in this certain restrictive way, it's not the women themselves, but the problem is men want women to be like this. And so she's a big fan of the philosopher Rousseau, who came up an awful lot in the French Revolution episodes, which might surprise you because one of the things we've talked about on this podcast with Rousseau is he was like, women are just like little silly billies and they should stay home and breastfeed children, the end. But Rousseau also had a thing where he's like, nature is important. Everybody should be treated the same. So you can see like those parts would appeal to Mary Wollstonecraft. She did not like the parts that Rousseau said about women, which I'll get to in one sec. But she cited Rousseau about how everybody should be treated the same. Here's a quote from her. So this is Mary Wollstonecraft saying, The education of the women, Rousseau says, should be always relative to men, to please, to be useful to us, to make us love and esteem them, to educate us when young, and take care of us when grown up, to advise, to console, to render our lives easy and agreeable. These are the duties of women at all times, and what they should be taught in their infancy. So Mary Wollstonecraft was like, okay, Rousseau is like the great champion of liberty, but he refuses to endorse freedom for women, and this is wrong, and I'm going to prove him wrong. And this is part of what she's doing in A Vindication on the Rights of Women. This publication, just as successful as the Rights of Men document, sold approximately the same number of copies. And so she had made a name for herself now, not just as a writer, but also as a philosopher, like with her own ideas. I mean, she had made it to her fans. This is the name she made for herself. There's like an increasing amount of haters. But you know what? Whether somebody buys the book because they like it or they hate it, that's still money for her. So whatever. The haters were just like, this confirms she's a dangerous radical. She cannot be trusted. She's a whore, etc. So she published this book, and then she was just kind of like, huh. And this is very relatable to me. It's how I feel when I finish like a podcast series. It's just like, I'm done. What now? Like, Fanny Blunt died, and she was so sad about that. And then she wrote a book. And ever since then, she's been always working on a book. And suddenly she's not got a book to write. And she's just like, who am I? Like in Zoolander. She was just like, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I don't know what my next book will be. Like, I have all this money. So it's not like it's desperate to like write another book. But like, what do I do with those? What do I do with all my passionate feelings about revolution? Some of her friends, various of her friends had been gotten in trouble for their revolutionary ways and had been kicked out of England and went to Paris. And she's like, well, it'd be nice to visit my friends in Paris, and also be nice to be in Paris where this important revolution of our time is happening. So she was like, yeah, I'm going to go to France in the middle of the French Revolution, just to like be amongst the radicals. And that's what I'm going to do. So Johnson, she convinced him to go with her. Fuseli, the like sex mentor who she wasn't having sex with, they both agreed to go with her, but Fuseli was like, I'm also going to bring my wife. So it was kind of like this 4-person group. So they set out for Dover, which is like where you leave England to go to France, in early August. But just as they were like about to get on their ship, the news arrived that French Revolution is happening. And what's happened now is that Tuileries Palace had been attacked. And this is the part in the Marie Antoinette episodes that we just did, where the royal family was almost assassinated. And then they were taken and put in the Temple, which is a kind of prison for them at this time. The Legislative Assembly was dissolved, and Lafayette from Hamilton, we also did episodes about him last season. So he had been the moderate leader of the National Guard. He was driven out of the country by radicals who had seized control of the revolution. So like things are pivoting into like the terror part of the revolution, the French Revolution, which on this podcast we call like the Purge. So they were like about to get on the ship to go to France, and it's like, oh, guess what? The Purge. And so Mary's like, oh my God, I even more want to go now. But the other 3 were like, no, veto, we vote against it. And so they turned back to London. But Mary Wollstonecraft was still just like, I really want to go to Paris now. Like, I even more want to go to Paris now. Like, now that it's the Purge vibes, like, I want to see my friends. Because her whole thing was just like, I want society to change. And she's like, in France, society is changing. And that was really exciting to her. So she worked with Johnson, her like supportive mentor. And so the plan was going to be she would go to France, and she would write up her observations and send them home for publication in the Analytical Review. So she'd be sort of like a foreign correspondent in Paris, 1792, just as the terror was starting. And Johnson was like, Lois Lane, you do it. Like, I believe in you. You can do whatever you want to do. And so that is what her next part of her story is going to be. And we will talk about that next week on the Vulgar History podcast. So I just want to clarify, because like there's so much I want to talk about this month, Mary Shelley Month. We've talked about Mary Shelley before on the podcast, but we're going to have some new Mary Shelley content, and also thinking back on some previous Mary Shelley content. There's a lot to say. I didn't realize that Mary Wollstonecraft was going to be 2 episodes. So this schedule is like a bit kooky, but it'll work. So next Wednesday is going to be Mary Wollstonecraft Part 2, concluding the story of Mary Shelley's mother. But coming up in 2 days on Friday, we're going to be having a very special episode talking to an author of a book that has got really big Mary Shelley / Mary Wollstonecraft vibes. We're going to be talking. Anyway, it's also got real Halloween vibes. I'm really excited for you to hear this author talk. That's coming up on Friday. So basically what I want to say, all month, there's basically going to be 2 episodes a week. So like a regular episode on Wednesday and then an author interview on a Friday. Mary Shelley Month. I'm really excited about it. I usually, in previous years, I've done like 1 Halloween episode. So I'm excited to be doing a whole month of Halloween episodes this month. And I want to just remind everybody, like Mary Wollstonecraft, I too am an author with golden red hair. And my book is called Rebel of the Regency, the Scandalous Saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Uncrowned Queen. It's coming out next February. And if you are on Goodreads or Storygraph, you can add it to your like to be read list. If you're on NetGalley, that's for like librarians, booksellers, reviewers, etc., you can request an advance copy and read it, and you can leave a nice little review there if you want as well. It's going to be coming out in Canada and the US in print and in ebook, and also as an audiobook. And so you can pre-order it basically wherever you get your books from, your local bookstore that you have in your city, or from an online website, or wherever you want to go. You can get all the links of how to buy the book at my website, which is rebeloftheregency.com. And then when you pre-order the book, I'm giving people some nice treats, which are, I really vibe with Mary Wollstonecraft, and part of it is she just like has strongly held opinions and just wants to like say things. And so do I. And that is why I have a Substack account where I write essays about women from history. And so if you submit your receipt for your pre-order of Rebel of the Regency, I will give you 1 year free paid membership to my Substack. Also, when you pre-order on my book and show me the receipt, you can get 1 year free membership to my Patreon, which is where you can get early ad-free access to all these episodes, as well as video versions of some of the episodes, as well as access to our Discord server, as well as access to bonus episodes like a Vulgar Piece Theater, where I talk about costume dramas. It's a good time. And also, honestly, just to be clear, pre-order my book, Rebel of the Regency. Get all the information and links at rebeloftheregency.com. Share your receipt. There's a form where you can put your picture of your receipt at rebeloftheregency.com. Let me know which treats you want to get, and I'll give those to you. But also, for free, there's a thing on Patreon now. So you can join as a paid member and get all these perks. You can also join as a free member, and you can just see all my like regular posting. Like Patreon has sort of like a social media feed now called Quips, where I'm just like sharing some information like behind the scenes about me and what I'm doing with the podcast, and like value added content about some of the episodes we've been doing. So just joining there for free is probably the best way to keep up with me and what I'm doing without having to be at the mercy of some sort of algorithm that other social media sites do, which is not to say I'm not there. I'm just blabbing now. Honestly, I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about Mary Wollstonecraft. I'm so excited to get to tell you what she gets up to in Paris in the French Revolution. You thought we were done with it. We'll never be done with it. And I'm excited that some of our friends we've talked about last season she's going to interact with them, and it'll be really fun. Anyway, so I'll be back on Friday with another special Mary Shelley episode. Next week, Mary Wollstonecraft Part 2. And until then, everybody, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Ann Foster. That's me. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans, and for everyone else at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod, and get in touch with me via email at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
From the darkest corners of our imagination comes a game show that's more ridiculous than terrifying. Welcome to Tickled to Death, the horror comedy game show where nothing is sacred, everything's a little unhinged, and the only thing more cursed than the questions are the jokes. I'm Roz Hernandez, your fearless host, and each week I'll be leading a brave group of guests through twisted horror trivia, improv games, and enough sarcastic banter to make you question all your life's choices. So come for the screams, stay for the snark. Listen to Tickled to Death wherever you get your podcasts, and hit follow unless you want the show to follow you. In the meantime, don't get tickled to death.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Tom.
Okay, so you want to tell him, or you want me to tell him?
No. I got this. I want people out there.
Yeah.
People, lean in. Get close. Listen, here's the deal.
We got big news.
We got monumental news. We got snacktacular news.
Yeah, after a brief hiatus, my good friend Michael Ian Black and I are coming back.
My good friend Tom Cavanaugh and I are coming back to do what we do best.
What we were put on this earth to do.
To pick a snack.
To eat a snack.
And to rate a snack.
Scientifically.
Emotionally.
Spiritually.
Mates is back.
Mike and Tom Eat Snacks is back.
A podcast for anyone with a mouth.
With a mouth. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
There are vampires out there. They walk among you, shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Heading to work, heading home, going to the bar. It's a life just like anyone else's, and I have grown used to it. To the darkness, to the moon, to the taste of blood on my tongue. But vampires are dying out. We are a fading kind, and I am the first one created in so long, and that is a dangerous thing to be. Those who came before me, elders of all stripes, they do not want to see our kind gone, and they will do anything to keep their power. And for myself, and for Grace who created me, that is a sword that hangs above our heads. And the worst person of all carries our secret, and he will use it however he sees fit. Who do you look to when things are at their darkest? From the creators of Parkdale Haunt comes Woodbine, a podcast about monsters, dreams, and changes, those you want and those you never saw coming. Season 2 arrives September 24th, distributed by Realm.